What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today we've got a push lawnmower that came in. Mowing season is soon to be here, and so everyone's bringing in their lawnmowers with various issues, but one issue I would say we run into 90% of the time is the mower won't start. And if you watched the last lawnmower video at the end of last week, that was due to a fuel issue, which is also very common. But what I wanted to do is take a step back and show you the mower as it comes in. I have no idea what's wrong with it yet. I haven't done anything to it, and kind of show you the process of diagnosing to figure out what problem you might have with your lawnmower. So this is one that came out of storage, and they said it wouldn't start last year, so I'm guessing they haven't messed with it yet this year. A lot of times you'll hear that they tried different things: spark plug, air filter, fresh gas, things like that, and it still won't start. And so what we're going to do is just give it the basic look over, find the issue, and get it fixed. So this mower in particular is a Briggs & Stratton Pulsa Prime. And a couple indicators on a Pulsa Prime is you'll have this style of air box. It's kind of a pentagon shape. It's rectangular with a point, or sometimes it'll be rectangular with a curve on one end. Another sign is you'll have one of these red bulbs, primer bulbs, out on top of the gas tank. And these are some of my favorite styles. Very often, but it's always a good thing to check, especially if it's somebody else's mower you're working on, is that it does have a blade attached. If you try and start one of these mowers without a blade, you're going to get a yank, you're going to snap that cord, you might break a finger or break your wrist. There's a lot of force there when this thing backfires without a blade on it, and so you want to be very mindful of that. So all of our preliminary checks are good, so we're going to go ahead and pretend like we'll start this thing. I'm going to push the fuel, and already I notice an issue. With this Pulsa Prime style carburetor, you're actually pumping fuel, and you should feel resistance and hear the fuel being pushed into the carburetor. If you listen here, it's not doing anything. So that's a problem. What we're going to do to take care of that is grab a flat screwdriver and remove our air filter. You can look right down in here, and I'll bring you in and show you this. Excuse the camera for a second. You can look right down in here, and you should see fuel being pumped right here and shot into the engine, and nothing's happening. So what we're going to do to start with is top off this gas tank and pump this a number of times and see if we're able to develop a prime. Alright, I've got the tank filled up to the brim. Put the cap on, and we're going to pump this 15 or 20 times if necessary. But already I'm feeling resistance, and we should see some fuel pump out. If we don't, it's telling us there's some sort of a blockage. Oh, there we go. We are getting a shot of fuel, but not very good yet. It's still not great. And another thing is it takes our bulb a long time to rebound. See that? It should come back instantly, and it's not. So what that's telling me is there's a blockage in the primer circuit or otherwise on this carburetor, and so we're going to have to go ahead and remove it. We'll put it in some cleaner, and then we'll replace the diaphragm. So what I'm going to do is remove the carburetor to start with. We're going to use a 1/2 inch socket right in here on this bolt. If you use an extension and a socket, come right in here next to the fuel filler. We'll remove that, and then remove this single 3/8 bolt on the front here, and we should be able to slide this back. I'll show you what that looks like to get your tank and carburetor off as one unit. Okay, so I've got my 1/2-inch socket on a 6-inch extension, which is excessive. You could get by with a 3-inch. Take that bolt out. You can set all your bolts right here in this little valley in the deck. It's a pretty convenient spot. And next we'll remove this 3/8 bolt on the front. I've also already slid this little elbow off on my PCV tube. And now we can simply swivel the tank and pop off the carburetor. And then we're just going to grab the governor linkage right here up on this loop and turn down and away. And that should pop right off. Kind of a little S hook on the bottom of that governor linkage that goes right in here to the throttle butterfly on the carburetor. So that's that. Once you get to this point, I'll take you over to the bench and show you how to pop off your carburetor assembly. So all we need for this is a Phillips screwdriver, and there are 5 Phillips screws around the perimeter of this carburetor that you've got to remove. So we'll work our way around. And now, as long as we're not gummed up too bad, we can kind of rock this carburetor gently to break the grime and varnish loose, and then lift straight out. There's this straw here that's going to try to get stuck in the hole on the carburetor. All you've got to do is tilt it and lift out like so. Next, I'm going to pull off the diaphragm. And the way that this goes is the diaphragm is a thinner gasket, and then the gasket sits on top of that. And so there's actually 2 parts here. There's a gasket and a diaphragm, and all you need to know is the diaphragm is on the bottom. So we've got our carburetor off. It's obviously very dirty. And I noticed something interesting here. If we look in our primer circuit here, it's very dirty, and this priming hole was full of grime. That's what's causing our problem right there. But we're going to clean it all anyway. So what I'll do is there's one spring here I don't want to lose. Just want to make sure it's going to stay. We're looking good. If yours falls out, just set it aside. And I'm actually going to soak this in my carburetor cleaning tank. What you could do is just hit it with some water and then some air, or brake clean, carburetor cleaner, whatever you have to clean this up. You will want to watch out for your primer bulb. If you're not planning to replace your primer bulb, you don't want to hit that too hard, or you'll actually damage that rubber on the primer with whatever chemical you're using. So if you're going to keep that, I'd recommend covering it up and kind of avoiding the area while you do your cleaning. So we'll do that, and once it's cleaned up, I'll meet you right back here. Okay, got my carburetor all cleaned up. What I ended up doing is just using a can of carburetor cleaner and spraying it down, making sure to hit all the important areas, including the screen on the bottom of the pickup tube, the screen here on the priming. This hole here, anytime you spray into a hole and you're not sure where it goes, or if it is a hole, you want to be very careful you're not watching what you're doing and actually look away with safety glasses on, because if you spray into a bottomless hole at any time and it comes back, it's going to go right in your eyes. And carburetor cleaner stings. It's not good for you at all. So be very careful cleaning this out with any sort of chemical like that. and do so at your own risk. If you're nervous about doing that, just use water. I've got a sprayer on my sink, and I use that all the time. I actually used it on this after I did the carb clean. Right away I took it over and rinsed it off with water, and then hit it with a blowgun on my air compressor. You can also use canned air if you've got something like that, like a computer duster or something, just to blow it dry and get all the water out of it. Okay, next step is we just want to wipe all this dirt and grime off of our carburetor sealing area and make sure not to drop any big chunks down in the tank, because that's going to cause problems later on. The best thing to do would be probably to drain all your gas out and do the same thing with this. Clean it up very good with water, spray it with air, and I have done that in the past. I can recommend it on the video, but for the purposes of the video, I'm just going to give this a simple, light cleaning. So in other words, I would recommend dumping your gas out. Clean this very well. Be careful with carburetor cleaner on painted surfaces. If you hit this with carb clean, it's going to strip your paint right off, and it looks pretty ugly. So unless you want a silver tank with no paint on it, I would just stick with the water and a brush or a rag, as well as compressed air. So we've got that cleaned out pretty well. What I'm going to do is cover up this pickup hole right here while I dump this over for a second. I'm just dumping that into my oil drain pan. And then finally, I'm going to hit down in some of these crevices lightly, just to kind of flood them with carburetor cleaner. I'm not pulling the trigger all the way because I don't want this to go crazy. I just want to flood a little bit down in there to dissolve some of that junk. And now with a clean rag, I'll just wipe this down real good. And you'll see all the gunk that I'm getting out of there on the rag. I'm guessing we'll get quite a bit off the bottom of this hole as well. All of that is what we're wanting to get out of there. So that's looking pretty good. Finally, I am going to hit each of these holes with carburetor cleaner, but as I mentioned, be very careful. You don't want to stand right over here and watch. You want to get the straw in there and look away and just give it a quick pull. So I was looking away, but you guys could probably see how that sprayed everywhere, and you don't want that to spray into your eyes. One final wipe down before we reassemble. Okay, we've got our new diaphragm here. This is a Briggs & Stratton 495770. I don't have a scissors or a knife handy. Be careful ripping open a diaphragm like that. You could easily tear it. And if you remember, we want our diaphragm down on the bottom, and it'll only fit one way. Like so, and then our gasket on top of that. Something just like that. Next, we'll take our carburetor, turn it a little bit to get that dip tube started, and gently set it down and make sure all your holes line up still. You don't want to shift the diaphragm around. I'm going to start a couple screws opposite each other to help hold that diaphragm in place. And then loosely at this point, tighten them down just about until they bottom out. And now I want to put those last two in. And we'll follow a little bit of a pattern as we tighten these, going crisscross. So I'm going to start in the middle on the side with 3 screws on it. Just get it pretty tight. We're tightening against plastic here, so you're not going to go too crazy. Now I'll go opposite that. Tighten that down. Come to the opposite corner. And then across. And finally, opposite corner. Tighten that down. Now at this point, we can actually take our rag and cover the hole opposite the primer. Punch your primer a few times. I can hear fuel being drawn in. And it's priming very well. Okay, going back on, the first thing will be to hook our linkage back into that throttle butterfly on the carburetor. We'll just go down and lift up, and then we're going to slide our carburetor over the intake tube. You'll kind of feel it seat as you get over that O-ring. We can take our 1/2-inch bolt. Make sure that your little metal spacer stayed in place down here. My mower has a hook that holds it in place. In your case, you might have that small spacer fall out, and that just goes in between the tank and the engine block. I'll just loosely start that, and now take our 3/8 bolt. Start that. Tighten it down, and finally tighten your 1/2-inch bolt. Not too crazy, just kind of snug and then a little bit extra. I've got an air filter gasket here, and we don't want to forget our PCV elbow. This will go with the small side on the metal tube and the large side on the carburetor. You can start the metal tube end and then just kind of flex it around onto the carburetor like that. In our case, I'm actually going to remove my air filter gasket because I want to run this without the air filter installed. And if you start it up with that gasket, a lot of times it'll rattle off. It could get eaten up by the blade and ruined. So I'm just going to leave it off. We'll give it a couple primes, making sure that it is pumping fuel. And mine is. And as long as we've got spark, we should get a start out of it. Remember, make sure to keep your tools that are on the ground clear of the lawnmower blade. Don't ask me how I know. There you go, it starts right up. It for sure runs on the prime because we saw it pumping fuel directly into the engine, but it continues to run on the carburetor itself. So that's a successful repair. I hope you found the video helpful. If you have any questions, you can let me know down in the comments. Otherwise, like and subscribe as always, and I'll see you on the next video.